Let's look at the prime clause for a software as a service, AI as a service, platform as a service, any kind of cloud services deal. What should that prime clause look like? And should it look like, for instance, the prime clause for an on-premise software license agreement? So here on the screen, you have very typical language that you see a lot, but there's something wrong with it. Vendor hereby grants customer a license to use the cloud services during the term limited to authorized seats. What's wrong with that language is the use of the verb or use of the noun license, that you've granted a license. Why is that a problem? It's a problem because you're not actually granting a copyright license to software as a service. I'll talk in a second about other interpretations of license, but this idea of using license for software as a service and other cloud services tends to come from the old world of on-premise software where everything is licensed. So we did it in the past, we'll do it with this. But you're not granting a license to reproduce. You're not granting any kind of copyright license to software as a service because the customer doesn't get to make a copy. The customer never gets a copy. So you might say, well, license is colloquial. It's fine to use the word license. We don't mean a copyright license. That may be right. And if you got into a dispute about this, it might be interpreted to mean exactly that. But one of the things we try and do with contracts is avoid any uncertainty, any ambiguity. And this one's easy to fix. It's easy enough to say, instead of a license, we're going to grant a subscription or use another word. I like the prime clause to be super simple. Vendor hereby authorizes customer to access and use the software as a service during the subscription term. And maybe subscription term or subscription period is defined somewhere else. Now, real quick final thoughts on this license question. First of all, if you're on the customer side and you're receiving licenses to cloud services, it's not going to do you any harm. It's the vendor's problem. It's the vendor's risk of over granting. If you're on the vendor side, I recommend you not have a heart attack. I'm not saying if you've done this in the past, it's terribly wrong. It's going to come back and bite you. It very well may not. It very well might just be consistently interpreted as a colloquial use of the word license. However, there's some scenarios where it's at least possible that this could be taken to be an intellectual property license, maybe it's taken to be a patent license when you didn't mean to grant a patent license and you actually need to talk to patent counsel before you do anything like that. Maybe it's taken to be a copyright license, like you get a dispute going with the customer and the customer demands a copy because of the license language. Maybe the use of the word license is taken to mean intellectual property and triggers legal doctrines like copyleft. If there's open source copyleft licensed code in your software as a service or AI as a service, maybe the obligations that go with copyleft are triggered by that. And it's a whole other explanation what all that means. Or maybe you change the bankruptcy rights. Licenses to intellectual property survive bankruptcy in general. So you don't want all of that. And you can avoid it so easily just by avoiding that word license. At least you greatly reduce the odds of those kinds of things. I actually generally take the next step, and the language available to you in the Tech Contracts Handbook takes that next step, which is saying very specifically, no intellectual property rights are granted. We are not granting you any IP rights you can access and use. So that language is available to you. What you really tend to get is, where the work goes into SaaS agreements is not this super simple prime clause I've given you, but then getting into specifications and stuff like the description of the system. The software as a service prime clause, though, doesn't necessarily end with that simple subscription right, that simple grant of rights. There's also a second half of the clause that you at least frequently see where we refine those rights. This is the same kind of thing you see in on-premise software licenses, where there actually is a license granted. You see this second part of the clause where you have all these refinements. Same thing with software as a service, and you see some of those refinements on here. I mentioned duration. There could be a subscription term. There usually is. During the subscription term, customer may access and use the software as a service, AI as a service, whatever. That's a scope term restricting duration. Or territory. You can access and use the system, but only from within your office in Los Angeles, or only from within the European Union, whatever it might be. Restrictions on use are particularly common. So seats, named users, less common to get named users, concurrent users. So you can access and use the system. The customer may access and use the system provided it does not exceed the number of seats listed in attachment B, or provided it does not have more than 13 users accessing the system at any given time. That is concurrent users. Those terms, seats and concurrent users, as I've mentioned elsewhere, they're industry terms. There's general agreement on what they mean, but not as much as you think. If you're going to rely on them to restrict your rights, make sure that you define them. Make sure you get really clear what they mean. Sometimes you have a restriction on transactions. Say you're an AI vendor and you got to limit how many queries go, how many prompts go to the AI, or it's going to eat up too much power. And so you have a restriction on transactions, or more often the restriction on transactions is actually just so the vendor can charge more if the customer does more transactions, so that there's sort of a higher fees tier. Internal use, also something that we see in on-premise software license agreements, this restriction to only using the technology for your own internal business purposes. Clear enough in a lot of deals, but there's some deals where internal is a fuzzy concept, and you again might want to define that. So you see there's a few things on this screen that are also crossed out. This is the set of scope terms that we typically look at for an on-premise software license, but some don't fit. Integration for distribution with other products, that doesn't really fit because the customer never gets a copy of software as a service. There would be nothing to distribute or integrate. Or virtualization is not a concept for software you don't get a copy of. But anyway, in short, we've got a pretty simple clause, something like vendor hereby authorizes customer to access and use the software as a service during the subscription term. One very simple sentence, maybe with some refinements, provided no more access than the number of seats listed on attachment B, something along those lines. Beyond that, it's a simple clause. If you found this video useful, please come check out Tech Contracts Academy. We provide training on drafting and negotiating contracts about artificial intelligence, cloud computing, and other forms of software. It's all for lawyers, contract managers, and any business people involved with contracts. So please come check out our programs live and on demand at techcontracts.com.